Hi everyone. So today we will talk about project-based learning. As you may know, one of the most fundamental teaching methodology at VinUni is called project-based learning. And so many students have asked me a question, what does it mean by project-based learning? I never learned projects in my high school, so how can I adapt to this teaching methodology at VinUni? So in this video, we will discuss the following things. First off, we will discuss what does it mean by project. Secondly, we will discuss for a student, how can you best learn in a project-based learning setting? And third, from a standpoint of visually, why is it important for us to learn by project-based learning? So first off, let's look at the concept of project. Project is everywhere. We use this word everywhere. We can say, hey, I'm going to launch a new product. And yeah, you can call that one a project. Another case that you say, hey, I have an event that I want to organize for Vietnamese Teachers Day on the 20th November 2020. And yes, you can call the whole team that working with you on this event planning project team. So that's also another project, and sometimes you have even a much longer project. For example, Vin Group is building, some tall buildings in Ho Chi Minh City, for example. That one may take a few years to complete. And then, so you may have a project that lasts for at least like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or even 10 years, if you do some research, for example. So we have heard the word project everywhere, and so many times. But how can we define? What does it mean by project? So a project is defined as a specific set of operations designed to accomplish a singular goal. It also means that a project is temporary. It has a defined beginning time and ending time. And also it has defined scope and resources. So I just discussed the definition of project. Right now, let's take a look deeper into a project. So usually a project will have 5 different phases. The very first phase, we call that one conception and initiation. Phase 2, we will call definition and planning. Phase 3, we will call launching and execution. Phase 4, we will call performance and control. And phase 5, we call project closure. So what do we have in each phase? For example, in phase 1 is the conception and initiation phase. We will usually talk about project charter. For example, what does it mean by project charter? It means that how we define everything in this project. What is the ultimate goals? What is the list of objectives that you want to achieve by the end of this project, for example? And then you may want to discuss about market research and then about the feasibility of this project, whether it makes sense to do it or not. Is there any special requirement about technical feasibility, for example? Those things, that's what it means by conception and initiation. It's very important for you to do a very careful job in the conception and initiation. The reason is because you want to have a very good big picture with very clear outcomes of the project that you are doing. And then when you finish phase 1, you can move on to phase 2. What does it mean by definition and planning? Definition means that you have to define the scope of work for each of the teams in this project. For example, definition of terminology if you do some research project. You may have some new terms. You may have some scientific terms, for example. So you have to define them clearly. And then for the planning phase, usually you have to plan at least 3 areas. You have to plan about the scope, you have to plan about budget, and then you have a good timeline, right? So in general, in phase 2, when we're talking about planning, you're looking at the whole timeline of the project, breakdown with each milestone. What do you have to achieve? What kind of scope of work that you have to finish? and then how much money or how much of resources that you are willing to spend on. So that is the definition and the planning. So if you think about it this way, the definition and planning is the time for you to draw the whole skeleton of the entire project. And then at that time, when you look at the whole planning, you can know if you may have some challenges at this point. Oh, I may need a lot of money for this point, for example. Oh, I may extra helps from my father and my family and my teachers for the point of the project, for example. So that's what it means by definition and planning. And then after successfully finishing the phase 1 and phase 2, now you're good to go. And then usually when you come to phase 3, that means a lot of work, right? Launching and execution require the whole team to sit in and roll your sleeve up and then start working on the project. So what do you have? Alright, you're gonna have KPIs for almost every single day or maybe every single week. You have to make sure that you have to complete this and that and this, for example, and then you have action plans for everyone for every tip in the project. And then also remember, you have to keep track of the quality, so you do not only want to finish the scope by time, but also you want to make sure that you deliver a high quality product. At least you must meet the promises with whoever stakeholder that you have. And then also in a launching and execution, you have to do some forecasting too. So, okay, I'm in phase 1.1 of the project, right? I'm finishing that right now. I'm moving up to 1.2, 1.3. So what do I need for tomorrow? What do we need for next week, for example? And then you may have to buy some materials. You may have to invite some expert, come to your project next week, for example. Right, so all those kind of things is the main scope of the launching and execution phase. And now, we move to phase number 4, which I call performance and control. What does it mean by performance and control? For example, very important, you have to keep track of the cost every single day when the project passes by. You want to make sure that this is how much money that I have spent. You don't want to spend too much money at the beginning, for example, right? You want to make sure that you're facing down the budget that you have, for example. And then you also have to make sure that at this phase, do I meet what delivery goals? Am I expecting, for example? You want to measure the quality. You want to measure the effort of the team, for example. So all those kinds of number, all those kinds of metrics give you a good view of how the project's going. And then also is gonna be the baseline for you to determine whether you need extra resources now, for example. So usually, if you look at a project phase 3, launching and execution phase, and phase 5, performance and control, happen at the same time, and then they usually iterate along the way. So you do phase 3, you look at matrix from phase 4. You may want to adjust something on phase 3. You may want to continue measurement on phase 4, for example. So keep going back and forth between phase 3 and 4. Alright, so now you finish all the work that you are assigned. You're at the end of the timeline. You use all of the resources and all the finance that you have for the project. You're coming to phase 5. Phase 5 is project closure. So what do you usually in the project close? For external stakeholder, you usually have to do some reporting. So you have to tell them, hey, so this is what I've done for you. Here are the list of bullet points that I already finished, for example. But it also is very important to document the process. So these documents here serve more for the internal purposes, for example. You finish the project and then you have a very good documentation. So this is the lesson learned that I have when I'm planning for the event. This is the lesson learned I have when I have to buy this equipment. This is the lesson learned I have when I have to invite some famous singers to my events, for example. So all those kind of lessons become the knowledge, not only for you, but also for the whole organization that you're working on. So, at project closure, you not only do the reporting for external, but you also have to prepare a lot of documentation and lessons learned for the internal. And then from that, you're not only finishing the project, but you're also building knowledge for the whole team. And if you do a good job in combining all the knowledge and experience, and then the next time when you come back to this project, or maybe someone else in the team on this project, they're gonna find it much easier for them. So we just discussed the definition of a project, and we also explore 5 different stages of the project. Now, let's talk about how you students should be prepared to learn in a project-based setting. So I have 9 different tips for everyone here. Tip number 1, use social media to keep engagement. Why is it important now? Let's take a look at this. Project-based learning is a learning approach where students explore real-world problems and challenges. So in real-world problems and challenges, information flow really fast. You have to keep updating yourself with what's going on outside. That's why you need to use different social media platforms to keep you and your team members work together and be updated with what's going on outside. It's also very important for you to use something like WhatsApp or Facebook or a Zalo group so that you can create a task box working together. It's just exactly like how companies in the real world working together. Tip number 2, you should set up a regular time for your team to meet and discuss the collaboration and the progress of a project. So same thing, I understand that when you start your VinUni education, you're gonna see that you have so many classes, and then each of the class, you may have 1 or 2 different projects. And then we may have some social projects outside of class, for example. So you're gonna have so many things on your plate. So it's very important for you to have regular time to meet with your team for every single project. For example, Project 101 for computer science. You always sit down with your team members to discuss about the project at 7 p.m. on Monday, for example. So that way, you can make sure that you have a good collaboration with everyone, and then you guys also allocate appropriate time amount for each of the projects. Tip number 3, you have to be ready to take ownership of the project. So you have to remember that your professors only facilitate, which also means that you have to take complete ownership. What does it mean by take complete ownership? If you don't take action, the project's not going to move. So you have to understand that you're driving this project, not your professor, not your team member, but you. And then, which also means that you're fully responsible and accountable for the success of the project. However, if you can build the mindset of ownership, it's going to be very important for you later on. If you really think about the real world companies outside there, later on, companies looking for people who can take ownership of what they're working on. Tip number 4, you always set a goal for each of your section when you work on the project. Why is that important? Now, let's think about this one. For every time you sit down and meet with your friends, for every time that you go outside to do something, to work on your project, you should have a very concrete goal. I've seen so many times that my students work on project, they work hard, they work a lot, they spend a lot of time, but then, at the end of the project, it's not moving. Why? Because each time they meet, they don't know what they want to talk about. They don't have an agenda. They don't have a clear goal for each of the section. So you may end up spending a lot of time on the project, but the result is not what you expected. Tip number 5, you should frequently reflect on the driving question. What does it mean by driving question? Not only each of the section, but for the entire journey, you should have one clear goal. You should have 1 or 2 clear and main questions that you have to be able to answer by the end of this project. So we conduct the one driving question, and every time when you work on each part of the project, you should ask yourself, hey, if I finish this part, what would I be able to answer for the big picture version? As long as you always keep in your mind the driving question, you keep frequent reflection on that, I'm pretty sure that you can keep track of your project. Tip number 6, it's best to have a team contract. What does it mean by team contract? The team contract is that something you sit down with your friend at the beginning of your project and say, hey, so this is a project. This is what we have to do. This is what we expected to learn at the end, right? So your role is this, and my role is this, so that everyone has a very clear expectation of what you're expected to do. Tip number 7, you have to be prepared for conflicts. I know it's difficult when you have issues and you start to be angry. You need to remember this. You and your friends are solving a problem, right? So it's okay to have different ideas. It's not necessary for everyone to avoid controversies. Sometimes you have to understand that controversy, different ideas, arguing, debating is good, right? However, we should make sure that all debates are healthy and constructive. What does it mean? It means that you don't attack on a personal level. You don't use emotion, but you should focus on rationale. You should focus on evidence. You should ask why my friend have different ideas from me. So it's very important for you to understand that conflict is okay as long as you can build on what you're conflicting about. Tip number 8, you should demand high expectations. What does it mean? So I've seen that students, when they start a project, they take it very easy. Sometimes they feel like, oh, okay, this project is easy. I can do it for fun, right? But then if you keep everything easy in your project, you're not going to learn as much. So it's very important for you, when you get started with your project, demand high quality. Ask for the best effort from everyone. You may spend just 1 or 2 hours per week on project, but you have to make sure that 1 or 2 hours is of high quality. So at the beginning, as I say, you should have a team contract, and in that one, you should make sure that, hey everyone, we must contribute serious amount of work and effort here. And then we should expect the highest quality, the highest expectation for everyone in this project. That way, I can guarantee that you can maximize your learning through the project. Tip number 9, which is the last tip for you. Project sounds like a teamwork, and that's correct. You work on the project with your team members, but you also need to reflect on each individual progress. What does it mean? You have always asked, what do I learn from this one? What do each of my friends learn in this project? So you and your whole team have to make sure that every single one of you actually learning something from this project. You should write down too. So back then, when I work on my project as a student, every single week I sit down and write, okay, for this project of this class, I learned this and this. For another project, for another class, this is what I learned. So when I have my learning journal, it's very beneficial for me to understand clearly what I'm learning from the project. So those are the 9 tips I have for students. In project-based learning, I just want to summarize. Number 1, use social media to keep engagement. Number 2, set up regular time for your team to meet up and make sure that collaboration is fine. Number 3, make sure that you take ownership of your project. You, not your professors, not your friends. Number 4, set goals for every time you work. Number 5, you should reflect on the writing questions. Make sure that you understand the big picture. Make sure that you know the progression of your project is towards what you're supposed to solve. Number 6 is best to have a team contract so that everyone has a clear expectation of everyone's role. Number 7, be prepared for conflicts but only allow healthy conflicts. Number 8, demand high expectation, demand high quality, demand serious work from everyone. And number 9, you should frequently reflect on each individual progress to make sure that every single one in the project team maximize their learning experience. Thank you.